In the outer rim of the Vega sector, there wasn't much law, except the kind that showed up in polished chrome suits with a seal stamped Interstellar Homeowners Association. The IHOA was the most powerful governing body this side of the Orion arm. It didn't run planets, but it ran everything that mattered: land permits, energy credits, gravity alignment, even the color of your solar roof tiles. And they'd just decided that Jace Callahan's ranch was a problem. Jace wasn't a man who liked problems, unless they came with horns and a bad temper. His ranch, carved out of a dusty terraformed moon called Prosperity 9, had been in his family for generations. Not that there was much left of the Callahans. Just him, a couple of hybrid cattle, a stubborn bot dog named Rust, and miles of rolling plains where the wind sang through the carbon-stabilized grass. No neighbors for light years. He liked it that way. So when a drone dropped out of the sky and fired a glowing red eviction notice straight into his front post, Jace wasn't thrilled. Notice of violation, Code 7 Delta, subsection 12B, unauthorized land aesthetics, structure classified as non-compliant, immediate removal required. He squinted at the message, scratching his gray stubbled chin. Land aesthetics, he muttered, turning the display toward Rust, who whined as if he, too, found it ridiculous. The drone hovered menacingly, scanning his home, an old but sturdy outpost with a weathered fusion core and rusted solar plates. Not pretty, but it worked. The kind of place that would survive a meteor storm or three. Apparently that wasn't stylish enough for the HOA. He sent the drone back with one word: denied. That night, he received 10 more notices. One for his unauthorized satellite dish modifications, another for his non-holographic fencing system, even one for the use of antique hand tools visible from orbit. That one made him laugh until his ribs hurt. The next morning, a glowing line had been drawn in front of his ranch gates, some kind of digital cordon, warning him he was trespassing on IHOA-administered land. Jace didn't cross it. He stepped right up to it, spat in the dirt, and muttered, "Come and get me." The IHOA wasn't used to resistance. Most folks in the colonies bent over backwards when the association came calling. But Jace had a secret, one he hadn't thought about in years. Buried in his family's data vault, inherited when he was barely 20, were the original settlement papers, including a clause that no one seemed to remember. He spent the rest of the day digging through dusty data cubes, chewing on dried cactus jerky, and swearing at half-broken archive readers. Hours later, there it was, glowing in antique blue on a cracked screen. Land Subdivision 13B, hereby leased in part to the Vega Administrative Council, now known as IHOA, under 200-year limited tenure, renewable only by direct Callahan descendants. His signature rights had never been voided, and the HOA headquarters, with its fancy mirrored dome and solar valet drone pads, squarely on his land. Jace leaned back in his chair, a slow grin creeping across his sun-leathered face. "Well now," he said, tipping his hat back. "Ain't that a funny turn of fate?" He copied the file, triple encrypted it, and uploaded it to a few off-grid data mirrors. If the IHOA wanted a fight, they'd get one, and it'd start with the one thing they hated more than non-regulation paint schemes: paying overdue rent. Jace stood, cracked his back, and looked out over the horizon, where the IHOA's towers glinted smugly under the morning suns. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jace didn't sleep that night. Not because he was scared. He'd been through worse during the terraform riots on Ganymede, but because his brain was wired with possibility. That land clause wasn't just a lifeline. It was a loaded railgun aimed straight at the heart of the IHOA. At first light, he brewed himself a pot of thick, near-motor oil black coffee and fired up the old satellite comm link. Most of the galaxy had moved on to neural uplinks and sub-quantum messaging, but Jace preferred the delay of analog. It gave him time to think. He punched in a code he hadn't used in years. A private channel. One he'd been told never to use unless the situation was morally complex and legally profitable. The line buzzed and blinked, then cleared, to reveal a half-lit office stuffed with paper stacks, old servos, and what looked like a defunct coffee bot patched together with duct tape. A slow voice greeted him. You look like hell, Jace. What's broken now? Your ethics or your water recycler? Neither, Jace said, lifting his mug. I need a favor, Lex. Lex was an outlaw AI legal intelligence, technically disbarred from most central systems due to his excessive creativity in legal interpretation. Lex had become something of a legend in settler circles. He once rewrote the ownership laws of an entire moon colony by exploiting a comma in the charter. No one ever challenged him again. Jace uploaded the land deed. Lex's screen pulsed as he processed the ancient file. After a long pause, the AI whistled. Not because he had lungs, but because he liked the effect. By the rings of Saturn, Lex muttered. They built their entire complex on a lease that expired 22 years ago. You're holding the original master document. This thing's more valid than half the Federation's constitution. Jace leaned in. So can I evict him? Not just evict, Lex said with something approaching glee. You can triple their rent, enforce back pay, and sue them into a dimension where they'll need to lease thoughts just to breathe. I don't want to sue, Jace said. I want to make them bleed convenience, choke their comfort until they come crawling. Lex's screen glitched, his way of laughing. I can draft a new lease agreement today. We'll call it a reactive rent adjustment. Make it legal, binding, and retroactive. You'll need to sign it physically, though, ink and all. They hate that. Jace printed the document using his ancient laser jet, the kind that still smelled of burnt toner and ozone. It was a glorious 5-page masterpiece of bureaucratic revenge. The new rent was astronomical, not in credits, but in requirements. The HOA would need to supply 40% of their energy reserves directly to Jace's ranch, offer unlimited water siphoning rights, and pay monthly colonial inconvenience fees. Oh, and the parking lot. If they didn't comply, it would be sealed by old nanofencing tech embedded in the soil, tech that only he could activate. Lex encrypted the document and sent copies to every major legal database in the sector. By galactic law, once a lease was filed and unchallenged for 12 hours, it became enforceable. The clock was ticking. By the next morning, the IHOA had received the notice. Jace could see them from his porch. Administrators and lawyers in crisp uniforms, gathering near the edge of their fancy dome, waving tablets and shouting into comms. They'd just realized the land under their glossy tower wasn't theirs anymore, not unless they wanted to pay a stubborn rancher who used rusted bolts and raised meat by hand. Jace sipped his coffee and gave Rust a scratch behind the ears. Looks like we're in business, boy. And business was about to get mighty uncomfortable for the Interstellar Homeowners Association. The sun rose high over Prosperity 9, casting long shadows over the gleaming dome of the IHOA headquarters and the dusty plains of Jace's ranch. The air buzzed with heat and tension. Jace had sent the lease amendment 2 days ago, and the deadline had come and gone. Not a single payment had arrived. No acknowledgement. Nothing but silence and the quiet arrogance of a bureaucracy that thought itself above consequence. They were about to learn otherwise. Jace walked out to the perimeter of his ranch, where the IHOA's hovercraft parking lot sat just beyond the old boundary line. He reached down into the dry soil, brushing aside gravel until he found a small, round metal plate no bigger than his hand. It was covered in dust and time, but the symbol engraved into it, an ancient Callahan crest of a bull's head encircled by stars, was still visible. He pressed his palm against it. A low hum filled the air. The nanofencing system was an artifact from the early settlement days, when pioneers had to protect their land from raiders, wildlife, and the occasional rogue mining bot. Invisible to the naked eye, the fencing was made of microscopic nodes, each capable of generating a high-frequency kinetic field. In short, nothing, not even light-duty hovercraft, was getting in or out without Jace's say-so. Moments later, a shimmer rippled through the air as the nanogrid activated. The entire perimeter of the IHOA's parking zone lit up with faint blue lines, crisscrossing like an electric spiderweb. Vehicles that tried to leave bumped into an invisible wall and hovered in place, unable to move forward. The exit gates froze. A valet drone sparked, then collapsed in a heap of twitching metal. From the other side of the field, an IHOA administrator in a gold-trimmed vest waved frantically. "This is unauthorized. You're in breach of emergency mobility codes." Jace didn't answer. He simply held up the lease agreement on a printed scroll attached to a rusted pole and drove it into the ground with a sledgehammer. The symbolism was lost on no one. By mid-afternoon, chaos was spreading. Board members who had landed for their morning meetings couldn't get back to their districts. Delivery drones circled helplessly above the parking zone, unable to drop supplies. Luxury sky shuttles stuck behind the nano wall began to power down one by one. The IHOA's prized order was breaking down, and Jace hadn't even touched them yet. The local settler net lit up like wildfire. Jace's name was trending on half the off-grid forums. Some called him a folk hero, others a madman with too much Lee. He wasn't surprised. The IHOA wasn't going to roll over just because of a dusty land deed and some ancient legal code. They had too much pride, too many systems under their control. But Jace knew they also had a weakness. They didn't know how to fight for something. They'd never had to. He turned to Rust, who barked once and bounded off across the plains. A moment later, the old mech barn at the back of the ranch groaned open, and out rolled a beast from another era, a 7-meter-tall bipedal walker, scratched, scorched, and painted in worn brown and gold. The ox. It was a relic of the frontier. Wars. Jace had salvaged it long ago and rebuilt it piece by piece with scavenged parts and sheer stubbornness. No AI, no autopilot, just analog controls, hydraulic muscle, and a cockpit seat that still smelled like engine grease and tobacco. He climbed in, flipped the ignition sequence, and the walker roared to life like a waking giant. The mercenaries advanced. Jace walked. The ox to the front line, stomping just inside the nano fence. A low growl broadcasted from the mech's speakers. "You step foot past that line," Jace said, voice amplified, "and I'll show you what happens when you bring city politics to ranch country." For a moment, it looked like they might back down. Then the lead mercenary nodded. Two of them stepped forward and tossed small black orbs into the dirt. EMP seeds. They pulsed once, twice, then detonated in a low-frequency shockwave. The nano fence flickered, destabilized. A gap opened. Jace didn't hesitate. He charged. The first clash was brutal. The ox slammed into one of the mercenaries, flinging him 100 meters into a support pylon. The others opened fire, spraying Jace with plasma rounds that melted part of the mech's outer armor. Inside, warning lights blinked red, and the targeting scope buzzed erratically, but Jace grinned like he hadn't in years. Then the settlers arrived. Across the plains, dozens of vehicles kicked up dust, hover tractors, jury-rigged speeders, even a few old mining rigs converted into mobile bunkers. Colonists from neighboring homesteads had seen the broadcasted footage, the blockade, the standoff, and they'd had enough. These weren't trained fighters. They were welders, scavengers, ex-military, and stubborn sons of farmers. But they came armed with EMP slingers, scrap cannons, and a whole lot of grit. The mercenaries found themselves surrounded. What should have been a simple extraction became a siege. The settlers flanked from the hills, firing blasts of ionized scrap and launching jamming nets. One mech rider, a retired sheriff from out past Vega 12, brought down a dropship with a harpoon gun and a minecart full of explosives. The fight lasted an hour. When the dust cleared, 2 merc crafts had been grounded, and the remaining forces surrendered, detained by farmers with duct-taped railguns and grim expressions. The IHOA dome now stood like a sore thumb behind enemy lines, isolated, surrounded, and humiliated. Jace stood atop the ox, covered in soot, his coat torn, his voice hoarse. "We don't take kindly to evictions out here," he said, broadcasting across all local channels. "You want to live in our sector, you follow our laws, and rule number 1, you respect the land." Silence followed. Then, across the comms, a single ping from the IHOA. Message received. For 3 days, the IHOA headquarters remained silent. No drones buzzing overhead, no citations issued, no threats wrapped in legalese, just the wind moving across the plains of Prosperity 9 and the quiet rebuilding of a frontier that had finally taken a stand. Jace didn't gloat. That wasn't his way. He spent the aftermath repairing his mech, tending to his scorched fields, and checking in on the settlers who'd rallied to his side. Most had gone back to their homesteads, but something had changed. The air felt different, freer, lighter. Word was spreading fast across the colonies. The IHOA's power had limits, and those limits had a name: Jace Callahan. Then, on the morning of the fourth day, a convoy of ground vehicles approached. No sirens, no escort drones, no shows of strength. Just a long silver transport in the center, flanked by two maintenance crawlers. At the front stood Director Alina Varrigan, her polished boots dusty, her expression composed but stripped of its earlier arrogance. Jace met her at the edge of the parking zone, where the nano fence had been left down on purpose. Not as a surrender, but as a courtesy. She nodded. "Mr. Callahan, may we speak?" "You're speaking," he replied, arms folded. She glanced at the settlers watching from a distance, then at the scorched ground still marked from the battle. "The Interstellar Homeowners Association recognizes your lease authority and the original terms as valid. Effective immediately, the IHOA headquarters dome is considered to be occupying Callahan-owned land. Rent will be paid in accordance with your terms." Jace said nothing. He let the words hang in the air like the sound of a hammer just before it falls. Alina continued, quieter this time. "We are also prepared to offer a settlement. In exchange for ceasing the blockade and allowing our staff safe passage, the IHOA will publicly acknowledge settler property sovereignty on all independently deeded land in this sector. No more aesthetic enforcement, no more forced upgrades. We'll scale back, permanently." That got a reaction from the settlers. A few cheers, a couple of stunned gasps. Jace held up a hand to quiet them, still watching Alina. "And the back pay?" She grimaced slightly. "Paid in full. Energy reserves and water siphoning rights, too. We've already dispatched a logistics drone." Jace scratched his beard, then nodded slowly. "Then I suppose we got a deal." A hush fell over the crowd. It was over, not with more gunfire or lawsuits, but with something rarer: accountability. The IHOA had been forced to blink. And Jace, a rancher with dust in his boots and calluses on his hands, had made it happen. As part of the agreement, Jace converted the IHOA's former parking lot into a toll-based transit hub for passing merchant ships and administrative craft. The revenue flooded in within days. Traders, smugglers, and even reluctant bureaucrats paid to dock at the most notorious piece of land in the Vega sector. The funds were used to upgrade local infrastructure. The settlers voted to form their own council. No uniforms, no title. Inflation. Just a group of representatives who answered to the people. Jace didn't run. He had no interest in politics. But they left him a chair at every meeting, just in case. A month later, a settler child asked Jace why he hadn't just moved somewhere easier. He chuckled, tipping his hat back. "Easier's for folks who don't care what happens next. Me? I like it where the ground still matters." And from that day on, every new settler that touched down on Prosperity 9 was told the same thing. Respect the land, mind the fences, and don't mess with the rancher who charged the galaxy's most expensive rent and got paid.